My name is Jonathan James. I'm the editor-in-chief over at Daily Dead, co-host of the Corpse Club podcast. You're here for a conversation with George C. Romero, who I have right here. Let's give him a hand.
Wasn't expecting such a huge turnout. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, so we're going to chat here for a little bit, and then we have a Day of the Dead screening coming up, so we're going to chat a little bit closer to that as well. But thank you for joining us right now. We're going to kind of jump around. We're going to talk about, you're an accomplished filmmaker, both in terms of commercial all the way to full features. I kind of want to start at the beginning and just, learn about what was it that got you into filmmaking? Why did you want to become a filmmaker? What was that moment where it finally clicked for you? Like, this is what I want to do for a living.
Honestly, it was the day that both my parents looked at me and said, "Don't do this for a living."
That's always a surefire way to make sure that you're gonna do it.
Yeah. And then the best way to get me to do something is to tell me that I can't. So that's truly what I did. And I started really becoming fascinated with it. And I went to work with my dad a few times, and it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. It was, he jumped out the car, and there's all these people asking him questions, like rapid-fire questions. I think the first time I ever went was on a movie he did called Night Riders. And all these people just rapid-fire these questions at him, and he just had definitive answers without any variation in his voice or anything at the time for every single person. And then they all scattered. And I thought, man, that's so cool. Like, to be able to know something so truly about your own vision or your own art or what you're creating, that you can answer questions that have to do with everything from lens choice to the shoes that somebody's wearing in seconds. And I became fascinated and just started doing it. Grabbed my friends and like a little 8mm film camera and started making neighborhood movies, and when I was like 8.
Yeah, and you shot, if I'm not mistaken, you shot a feature when you were 18 or something
I did,
like
yeah,
that? Yeah,
I did. I shot a feature called Plant Life that I'm still trying to forget. But it was a cool experience because it was the first time that I ever told a group of people, I said, look, I can do this. And they kind of called me out and said, well, prove it. So that was, again, my motivation. And it seems that this industry is full of people who do things in the face of adversity or in the face of a world telling you that you can't. And it just pushes us and drives us, Orson Welles said it best. He said, a writer needs a pen. What was it? A writer needs a pen. Anyway, but it ends with a filmmaker needs an army, and I think that's a huge part of the appeal too. It's not something that you can just go out and do. You need people to be in front of the camera. You need people to do all the things that go into the camera, and it's like this huge jigsaw puzzle with no picture on the box to go from. And the only picture you have is the one in your head. And there's something really appealing about that to me.
I heard somebody say once, and I'm sure it's been said before, that it's kind of like alchemy. There is no set rules for how to make a film or how to make a successful film. No. And I think that's kind of the appeal about it as well, is that it is it's uncharted waters. Kind of every time you get there, in terms of, is your vision going to actually, make it in front of people. Now, you talked about being on the set for Night Riders with your dad. What were some of the other sets you were on with him?
I think probably the most fun set I was on with him was a film called The Dark Half.
That's a great movie.
Yeah, it really was. And it was a really fun set to be on, and I was at the right age. I think I was 17 or something, and it was just a perfect storm of all of the elements. It was the biggest project he'd done at that point in his life or his career, and it was the biggest crew and the biggest crowd and the biggest everything, and it was so cool. And I just kept going back and going back and going back, and every once in a while I'd run through the background of a shot or something.
I mean, growing up, obviously, your father's made some of the greatest horror movies ever made. Aside from those, were you really into horror growing up? If
Yeah.
so, what were some of your favorite movies?
It wasn't, I get asked this question a lot, and the answer that I've kind of landed on over my life is that I don't like to call out specific films. I like to call out filmmakers that inspired me, And at the time when I was growing up, I was really into all the Italian guys, and the Spanish guys and all of that stuff. So, your Bava and all of those guys, Argento, and then I got to meet Dario and with my
nice.
dad and that on Two Evil Eyes. And that was a crazy experience. And, it's like back then it was pretty cool to meet your heroes, I don't know if it's as cool to meet your heroes these days, but back then it was really cool. And everybody else that I met who weren't my parents would tell me, give me all this great advice. Well, you should do this. My mom was an ad exec, and my dad made movies, and so all these people were like, well, you're creative, accept it, And again, the more people told me that, the more I tried to go pursue like a business mindset. And then I realized very quickly that even though I could do that and I was okay at it, I didn't fit in that world very well. This is where I fit, and it's the only thing that I've ever really loved doing. Every day you wake up. Every day, a bad day making a movie is still a really good day,
Yeah, because you get to do what you love. You get to create stuff. I mean, I've been in
Yeah.
similar situations where with running a website, there's all that business side of it. And it's like, I don't want to do that. I want to write. I want to create stuff. And
Yeah, but you have to do it, and you have to, and that was a big criticism that people had for my father years and years ago, was that he was so into his art that, he wasn't really into the business of it, and he had people for that, and I think that's great. But then there was my mom, the ad exec. She used to tell me, do your own business. Don't let anybody do that for you. And I think that was probably some pretty solid advice. But yeah, it's about the creation. The rest of the stuff is everything else is to support the creation of whatever it is you've got to say. And I just try to make sure that everything I make has something to say. It doesn't have to be super important. But sometimes there's like that thought that just gets stuck in your head, and you have to get it out, and the only way to get it out is to make a movie.
what was some of the greatest advice that you got from your father?
I think I told you this on the phone. The best advice that he ever gave me, I don't even think he realized it. We lived in this house in Pittsburgh, and I was a little kid, and he had this huge Steenbeck flatbed editing table upstairs. And I just remember I would go in the room, and it was like filled with cigarette smoke, and his hair was crazy, and he was just cutting like a madman with this little light shining in front of him. And he looked back at me one day and he said, always cut wide. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, if you cut wide, there's always room to take more out, but if you don't cut wide enough, then you can't put it back in. And that advice actually has stuck with me and carried with me in almost everything, from writing to friendships to business to filmmaking to everything. It's literally some of the best advice I've ever been given by anybody. And I don't even think he realized what he was doing when he did it. I think he was just in the throes of cutting and said, always cut wide. Just, pissed off at himself, I think, because I think he cut something out that he wanted to put back in. And that's, to this day, the best advice the man ever gave me.
I was looking at IMDb because I tend to dig through that stuff, and it's not always accurate, but I did see that you had a credit as a PA on The Burbs. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How much time did you spend on the set for that? It's one of my favorite horror comedies.
Yeah,
I
mine
had to
too.
bring it up.
I was there a few weeks, actually. I used to go out to LA with my dad a bunch when I was younger, and he would go do his thing, and I would take his lot pass and just kind of go get in trouble. And one of the days I got in trouble, I ended up getting somebody coffee on The Burbs, and they just assumed I was part of the crew. So I kept going back.
That's great. Was that on the Universal lot? Where was that?
Yeah. And it was a lot of fun. It was on the little neighborhood back lot there. And I just kept going back, and they just kept asking me to get coffee. So I did, and it was a great experience. I loved
Yeah.
it.
Oh, that's such a great movie. If you haven't seen The Burbs, like definitely, it's a regular watch for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I want to talk about, I'd say maybe you started this in 2010, and some of the people in the audience may have heard of this, as a Night of the Living Dead prequel project that you were working on with your father called Rise of the Living Dead. Now I understand it's just called Rise, but can you kind of talk about that, maybe from how it started originally and kind of where it is now?
Sure. Originally the concept, obviously growing up with my dad, being my dad, obviously Night of the Living Dead's always been at the forefront of my entire life. Along with the fact that he, was, and it still always will be, George Romero. He was still dad. And, I think we all try to find some way, especially when our parents are getting older, to kind of tell them all the things that we wanted to, maybe, And I didn't really know how to do that with him because we weren't really like, hey, let's talk about our feelings. So I wrote Rise, and I called it Origins, and the whole concept stems from the opening of his original night and backtracks for 6 years leading up. So it's not really a prequel, it's more of like my personal prologue to his work, but more importantly, it's literally just like a love letter to my father. And that's how it came about. And I showed it to him, and he fell in love with it. And I still have the email. He even said the first, literally, I sent it to him, and he emailed me 12 hours later. And I was like, wow, you actually read it. Because here I am, I'm sending my zombie script to George Romero, but I'm also sending my, this deep, heartfelt thing to my father. And he emailed me back with citing things all throughout the script, and said he didn't even realize what it was until he read the very end. And at that point, he just flipped out and wrote me this huge, long, love letter back. And it really did something, I think, good for us, that I think everybody wants to happen with their parents at some point. And so that's kind of how it was born. Since then, that was in 2010, yeah. And that's how it was born, and we were always supposed to make it together, but it's not as easy to get films financed at what's now considered a high budget for an independent film at $7 million. So it took a while, and then with my background in advertising and commercials and stuff, I started just taking that time to develop the property further. And so now we've got everything from graphic novels to a series that's in development. I've even got a classic tabletop role-playing game.
I saw some pictures of that on the Facebook page.
Yeah, and we're making
fun.
little figures, and it's really cool. So I think that's honestly more than the movie. That if I had to pick something else about it that excites me, it would be the RPG, because it's such a cool concept and such a cool entry into that world, that I think what we've done is we've done a really good job at creating a property that both new and old fans can love, can fall in love with, and can use to kind of remember and honor my dad, and kind of just celebrate the whole thing together as fans.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds great. Now I think the phrase was Deadverse is kind of the overarching property name. Is that what you're going with?
Well, the Deadverse is something that is Rise is part of it, and all the different elements of Rise are part of it. But the Deadverse is something, it's kind of like a fan term that was thrown around, having to do with a lot of things in my dad's sort of past. And then I saw some articles where some of my stuff was thrown in there. And so it just kind of made sense to call it all Romero's Deadverse, and put everything in there. So that's where we've got not just Rise, but there's a lot of other cool things in there. And that's romerosdeadverse.com. It's got everything on there. If I were to list it all right now, we'd be here until the movie was over.
Yeah, but for fans, that's super exciting. What do you think is for Rise? Where you were telling me about you're looking at shooting in Kentucky. Can you talk about why you wanted to do that, and do you know when you'll be filming or what the first new project will be? Whether it's the RPG project will be first or the movie itself.
All of those things will sort of come out simultaneously. We're not going to release any of them until the movie is at least in production. We're about 70% of the way on our financing right now, so we're just working to close up some gaps and deal with that kind of thing. And then I'm working with some scheduling issues. One of the things that really excites me is a good friend of mine is a guy named Shane Hurlbut. He's a cinematographer.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah. So he's going to shoot it. And I'm so excited for that. He's like my cinematography idol, and has taught me literally a 15-minute conversation with Shane will teach you more than you can learn in a year of school, and he doesn't even realize he's teaching you. He's just throwing stuff out off the top of his head, and if you're into it, then you just eat it up, and then the next thing you know, the next time you pick up a camera, there's Shane in your head. And so the fact that he's going to shoot it is it's like a life goal to work with him. So that's very exciting. And then Robert Kurtzman's going to be doing the effects.
No, that's gonna be good.
Yeah. So and he's excited about that. Yeah. And his shop has already turned out some pretty cool preliminary concepts.
Is it just going through him, or that's through K&B completely?
No, it's just Kurtzman through his company.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Well, because I mean they work on the Walking Dead as well, obviously. So couldn't pick a better place to work with.
Yeah. So and he and we've been friends for years too. So that's very exciting. And then there's some stuff that we're going to be announcing pretty soon that I would love to kind of drop here at this festival, but I legally can't yet. But anyway, so there are some scheduling issues that we're working on to make sure everybody can show up and play all at the same time. And that's a big holdup, because when you work with somebody like Shane or Bob, those guys are working nonstop, and and then you've got like the filmmaker who's that's my entire world, and to those guys it's just going to be another project. But what I love about it is that neither of them act that way or treat it as such. They both, because of the love, the love for my dad, the legacy, everything, everybody's really bringing just their own passion to it, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think you'll find that same kind of support from the fans as well. It's all kind of really exciting to see people come together for something like this. So I can't wait to hear more when you can talk about it.
Yeah, hey, I can talk about everything I can talk about. Just like I said, I don't want to just sit here and ramble.
There's some other projects you have coming up that I kind of wanted to talk about as well, because they really excite me. So can you tell the audience a little bit about some of the VR projects that you have in the works? Yeah,
so there's one big project that I'm doing simultaneously as traditional theatrical style and VR. And the project's called Sunken, and it is an underwater thriller. It's a psychological horror film, and it takes place, about 90% of the film takes place underwater, with a family that is in a very perilous situation, put there by some very dark people. So, and it's just such a cool, claustrophobic experience. I saw this movie called Buried.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, and I kept thinking to myself, what's more claustrophobic than that? And I have this tendency to explore really psychological horror. And I wanted to just come up with something that was more claustrophobic. And I thought, being trapped underwater is probably worse than being trapped in a box, because you're in this hostile environment where humans can't exist. There's no way to get out. And as far as you can see, it's not just a box, it's not just Earth. It's as far as you can see, you're underwater and there's no hope of surfacing. And what do you do? And then I thought, well, what's even worse than that? Let's take a whole family and put them down there. And then let's make a family that doesn't get along very well and put them in a situation where they've got to figure out their own personal shit so that they can then work together to get out of that situation. And it's great because a lot of the things that people expect don't show up, and some of the things that nobody ever expects do show up. So it's a lot of fun, and we're doing that in virtual reality. We're doing that as a VR project. And I think we're going to do that actually in spurts. So we're going to release the VR of it in like short mini episodes, because I guess the general consensus is that VR is not at a place where people can sit through an hour and a half of a VR experience, which I personally disagree with. I would be locked in.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it's the investment right now that nobody really just wants to go all out there. It's like it's waiting for a killer horror movie. It really is.
Yeah, and you know, it's a great testing ground for it, and it's the right fan base for it. And I think that when when it's over, I think there's not going to be a person who watches it who doesn't literally gasp for air. It's the most claustrophobic story I could have ever come up with. And
Yeah,
I'm pretty
super
claustrophobic,
exciting.
So, yes.
Yeah, I think Delusion, they're touring with, and they haven't even released it episodically, but that's how they've done it, where Skybound's doing it. So it's like 4 episodes or 5 episodes or 5 minutes each, and
Yeah.
people seem to like that format for now. But yeah, I'm all for the 90 minutes.
Me too. And you know, and I keep pushing it, and everybody says 5 minutes, 8 minutes, and I keep saying if we're going to do it, it's got to be 15 minutes. It's got, you know, because you've got to get locked into that point of discomfort. You know, if it's something that you say, oh well, I've only got a couple of minutes, I can do this. It's not going to be the same thing. You've got to lock in.
Yeah, what I found is most VR right now feels more like an amusement park attraction. So something that's over. Even the scary ones are over very quickly.
Yeah.
They're not very story driven. Most of them. There's some good ones there.
Right.
Is technology a stumbling point for you with VR right now, or do you feel like it's at a place where you can do everything you need and that the right headsets are available and all that?
I think everything's ready for it. I think it's ripe for it. I think that it's just the right time. You know, I mean, it's literally something you can watch on a Samsung one with your phone, or an Oculus, or you know, whatever. So I think it's all ready to go. I don't think that there's anything that would really, you know, technologically that would stand in the way of the project. The biggest issue getting that one into production is a lot of people are afraid of the insurance costs. To be perfectly honest, they say, well, you can't take all your actors and put them underwater. Why don't you just shoot it, you know, on green screen and CG it all? And no, thank you. You know, I would rather go out and raise extra money and pay for more insurance than fake it, because you know, there's no actual sense of danger if an audience watches an actor and knows that that actor was not even remotely in a perilous situation. Not that there's any danger on, you know what I mean? But like, yeah. If there's nothing real about it at all, then how is the audience gonna buy it?
Yeah, I mean, even as good as CG gets, you can still, like, your brain still is like, hey, that's not exactly real. Like, they've gotten really good with CG blood these days. I can still see it. I know it.
Yeah.
I know they've added it.
Yeah, you see a gunshot and you see some CG blood or whatever, you know, and I try to avoid it as much as possible. Sometimes you can't avoid it, and you have to supplement with it, whatever. But, you know, I'm just not from that school. And I think I'm happy that I'm not from that school, because you know, part of what made movies so great, in my opinion, was the fact that it was somebody writes a scene, and then 100 people show up to make that scene, and invariably either one thing or everything goes wrong while you're trying to make that scene, and you've got to literally hammer a square peg into a round hole to get it done. And the challenge of getting everything just in the can, that was part of what, I mean, half of the most amazing stuff that ever made it into movies back in the day was like by mistake, you know. And now there's when you get into all this huge stuff with all this CG, there's literally no margin for error, and it's great. It creates these phenomenal theatrical experiences, but it used to be different, you know?
Yeah, no, I get that.
And it's just not like that much anymore. And that's why I think I still love the horror world. It's still people doing it for the passion.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because we talked about some of your heroes when you were growing up, but now who do you look up to, or what indie filmmakers, horror filmmakers, whether it's indie or studio, do you think are kind of doing it right or pushing the envelope these days?
I think the guys who did Get Out did a really good job with that project. I think, again, it's tough because if you say, so and so does a great job, or so and so, is perfect at this or perfect at that, it's like anything. There's so many opinions out there, and that's what makes it great, but that's also what makes it tough to kind of, really land on anything, because even in a terrible film, there's great moments, and especially in the indie world, if something is a complete train wreck, there might be a phenomenal shot, or a great monologue, or a great effect, or a great kill, and so I don't think it's fair to say that anybody is better than anybody else. I think if anybody gets a movie made and finished, that they become a member of a club. And I think that anybody who actually has what it takes to get a film in the can deserves all the respect on the planet. It's really, really hard to get done.
No, I think that's very well said. I think that general audiences have a habit of just being, I liked it, I didn't like it. I think that horror fans in particular are a little more forgiving. It seems like they understand the process a little bit more. They champion indie films, and so that's kind of what I love about the horror community, because they know like not everything was great, but also like these guys made it for $25,000, for example, or whatever.
Exactly.
And they kind of look for that gem. Before we keep going, does anyone in the audience have any questions? I wanted to make sure we got any questions. If you do, raise your hand. I think we see somebody right there. What's your question?
Well, I'm kind of actually nervous because it's your father just made literally two of my favorite films of all time, Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, and I literally just drove 2 hours to come here because I've always wanted to see Day of the Dead or Dawn of the Dead in the movie theater, and I'm not really even sure if I have a question. I just really wanted to to get up here, and I'm really glad I did, and I'm curious what would you have to do to get into your production company? Like, if you had ideas to make a movie, or because I know you have a production company. That's correct. Because I got here kind of late because I was trying to find park, and there's so many people.
No worries, man. I think it's really cool that you came out for this. It's definitely very cool to see this one on a big screen. So I think that's really cool. And yes, I do have a company, Romero Pictures. And we have basically just a traditional submission process. And the reason for that is because of the legalities behind it. Just go to my website and shoot me an email.
Sometimes I have ideas. I really want to make a movie at some point in my life. And your father, literally, I met him in Worcester, Massachusetts, in 2010.
Yeah.
At the Rock and Shock convention, and he was just such a nice guy. And I met him, Tom Savini, Ken Forey. I think actually Galen Ross is supposed to be there next week, and Scott Renning. How do you say his last name?
Renninger?
Yeah. I always say it wrong. But I really wanted to meet them too, and you're right about how movies are so much different now with the CGI, because I literally watch Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead almost religiously. Every October I watch it. I literally just watched Dawn of the Dead last night, and I only didn't watch Day of the Dead this week because I wanted to save it for this and stuff. And so I'm really nervous.
Don't sweat it, man.
And I guess I just wanted, I didn't mean to make it too long or anything, but what memories do you have from either Dawn of the Dead or Day of the Dead from your father's film those movies? Were you on set at all, or did
I was pretty young for Dawn.
Yeah, that's what
Most of my memories for that are hanging out at his house and seeing some footage and listening to the music and as he was trying to figure out where to put tracks and which ones he liked and all that. So those are most of my memories from that day. I went on the set a few times. It was pretty cool. Yeah.
It's awesome how I'm sorry, I'm gonna keep talking.
Don't sweat it, man. It's all good.
Anyway, real quick though, I heard that the studio, like he was originally trying to make, when I watched the making of it, like a Raiders of the Lost Ark zombie movie studio did. And then I guess it said like they pushed his budget down to like 3 million or something. And it was insane how he managed to write such like a perfect movie in my opinion, because only for Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, those are two movies that I literally just know every single word for.
That's cool.
And I just love how he puts so much craft into like just the set and the Tom Savini on the makeup, and just every actor like just seemed to do an amazing performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mean to keep talking. I know it's a people.
It's all good, man.
I really appreciate it, man.
No worries. Thank you for the love. That's like there you go. That's exactly why we do what we do, because there are guys out there like you who love it. You know what I mean? So that means the world to me that you came out and talked about that stuff, man. Truly.
Yeah, thank you. I guess tagging on to that, what advice would you have for indie filmmakers? So if he's gonna, for anyone, whether it's the guy in the audience or somebody else, they don't really have a budget. They just wanna make a film. They wanna kind of do what you did when you were 18, just get it done. What would be your best advice for somebody just looking to get it done?
Just do it. Literally. I mean, it is, it's one of those things. And it's, nowadays there's less excuses because we all carry 4K cameras and theaters in our pocket. So literally just get it done. I mean, the biggest thing that kept me from making my first feature for so long, at the time I felt like, oh my God, I'm 17, I haven't even made a feature yet, what the hell? But it was because I always second guessed myself. Just don't. If you've got something in your head and it has to get out, just do it. Get your army. Oh, and the quote is, an artist needs a brush, a writer needs a pen, and a filmmaker needs an army.
That's it?
Yeah, so I knew it would come. So all I had to do was talk about something else, and I thought of it. But just find an army. I don't care if friends, family, whoever. Go, if you got to shoot a street scene, stand on a public sidewalk and ask a stranger to hold your camera.
Yeah, I think
whatever you got to do. Like, just literally just get it done.
Yeah, I think Soderbergh just shot, was it Unsane? He did it with an iPhone, so
Yeah.
yeah, you can use an iPhone to shoot a film if you need to.
He was a big inspiration for me. He had a show on HBO, I think it was on HBO, called K Street. It was a DC-based like political show. And I read an article about it that he was working on something else at the time, and he was doing the show, and he would like read the paper on Sunday, write the episode Sunday night, fly to DC, shoot Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then cut Thursday and Friday, and then it would air. And I always thought, well, that's so cool. So I wrote a film called Radical, and I shot it. I think I wrote it in 4 days, and I shot it in 5 nights. And again, did it with literally a crew of like 5 people, and it was friends. My sound guy from Pittsburgh flew out to LA, and a buddy of mine happened to own a T-shirt factory. And I said, hey, can I use your place to shoot a movie? And he said, yeah. And I said, cool, I'll be back. I'm going to go write it. And I wrote it, and then we shot it, and then I cut it, I think, in 20 days. And I had a movie in less than a month. And it was not something I want to do again. But I wanted to do it because I thought that it was impossible. So it's not.
That's a good reason to do it.
Yeah.
Does anybody else in the audience have any questions? Oh, okay.
On your right arm, you have the word accountability.
I do.
What does that mean to you?
Everything. Literally everything. It's, my grandfather, who's on my left arm, he, just quick backstory. When my mother was born, her mom died giving birth to her. And so he didn't know what to do. He wasn't ready to be a single dad. So he left my mom with friends for 5 years while he went and got a college degree. And he was driving horse-drawn taxis in Pittsburgh at the time to make money. And he came back 5 years later with a college degree and a job, and he retired vice president of Calgon Steel. And his nickname was The Accountable. And so he basically spent his life and career being accountable for himself and for others. And they gave him like this silver tray with the signatures etched in it of everybody who he ever like took care of or looked out for. And so at a very young age, I knew his name was the Accountable. And it just became a very important thing to me. You know, we all make mistakes. We all do dumb shit. But, you know, as long as you own it and you're fully accountable for your own actions, then there's a peace that comes over you, and I think you can walk through life pretty calm.
So your family is all from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
It seems like.
Yeah.
How has it influenced your work?
Oh, geez, that's a brand new question, I think. I grew up, my dad, you know, one of his first jobs was he was a sideline photographer for the Steelers. And as a result, I got to go to some of the games that we won, all the Super Bowls and stuff. And, you know, in the 70s, when I was a little kid, it was right after sort of the steel industry had mostly died. And so Pittsburgh was this sort of like floundering town with no identity other than sports and this guy who made movies. And then he made Dawn, and I watched a whole city come out. And that was pretty cool. And so I think, you know, there's a work ethic in Pittsburgh, and there's this sort of mindset that I've never seen anywhere else. And I think that was a large influence on me. It's just this whole, we don't stop until it's done, and we don't not do it because it's hard. And I think that's probably the best answer I can give you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we had another question back there. Yes.
Real quick, do you go with the old school of your dad with slow-moving zombies or the new fast-moving zombies?
I'm just messing with you. Of course, it's the Romero zombie all the way, man. You know, zombies don't run. Although, you know, as fans know, in the original Night, they do have the ability to use tools like rocks to smash windows and problem solve, and there's sort of like lumber. So, you know, there was a lot of that, and you know, over time, it's become this sort of divisive, like you asked, you know, runners or walkers, you know, and you know, I'm definitely a slow zombie guy, but I do really latch on to some of that stuff that my dad had in the early days with the original Night, that there actually is some residual ability there. Yeah.
You know, and I think that's all. What's interesting about that too, because we're going to be seeing, you know, I guess most people in the audience are going to be seeing Day. You know, it's one of the things that I love about Day of the Dead, and you know, and I guess for your father as well, and for a lot of filmmakers, I guess if you look at like Tobe Hooper, you look at John Carpenter, like a lot of their movies were not appreciated when they first came out. Like The Thing, you know, Carpenter's Thing remake did not do well. It went up against E.T. that year, or Kubrick's The Shining. All, you know, found an audience later, and I find that a lot with Day of the Dead. Like I think a lot of people are now kind of really turning on to that, because now we see so many movies that are just kind of a template of what they've already seen in Night, and Day is the one that kind of really stands out to me because it's kind of breaking those original rules.
Yeah, it does break the original rules, but it also doesn't if you go back to that opening scene.
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
what I mean? Like, and people forget that about.
Yeah,
the
they kind of ignore that and
Yeah,
just
they're like,
think
"Oh,
about the
well,
slow-moving ones.
Yeah, and they think, well, it's a horde, and that's the only thing that's dangerous. That's not true. There was a single zombie in the opening scene of Night who problem solved and used tools. When you break it down to the most basic version of it, he used a rock, smashed a window, and figured out how to gain entry into a vehicle. So that, you know, so in my opinion, Day brought that opening scene completely full circle.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. You know, a lot of people have asked your father about this. I've asked plenty of people about this. Zombies are bigger than ever now. You know, why? Why do people latch onto it? What's your answer to that? Why are zombies bigger than ever?
Because when Night of the Living Dead went into the public domain, while it was a hard pill for those guys to swallow back then, I try to look at it from the standpoint of what they did was ultimately create an open source monster, basically. So they took this thing, and it ended up being literally thrown to the world for basically anybody to do anything they want with. So it became this place for special effects guys to start their craft. It became this place to inspire authors and musicians and bands and all kinds of artists all across the board, because nobody was going to get in trouble for messing with it. You know, not like the Universal monsters. You know, if you go out and try to infringe on the Universal monsters, then you get like a whole building of lawyers.
Yeah, they'll go after you.
And you know, and that just wasn't the case. So I think what happened was they inadvertently created this practice ground for people to feel free to go out and express themselves. And up until then, really, I mean, independent film wasn't really, it was like this weird art house shit, you know, back in the 60s, which was awesome. But then here these guys come with something nobody had ever really seen before, unless you were a hardcore horror fan and had seen some of the early, you know, things like that. But then here we are with these creatures that everybody can jump in and play with. And I think that that's what kicked it off. And I also think that there was this sort of elitism that came with it too, because you had to seek it out back then. You know, like it was the stuff kids weren't allowed to watch, but every kid had seen it. You know, and it, back then in the 70s, you know, it was like a badge of honor. You know, yeah, I've seen Night of the Living Dead. You know, no way. You know.
Yeah, hey, that's still burned into my mom's memory. She won't watch it. That scene with the when the girl turns, the zombie starts stabbing her mom, it makes her gag just to think about it. And she can watch anything else, and she's like, she couldn't see The Exorcist for a while. I got her to see it, and she's like, you got me to see The Exorcist. I won't watch Night of the Living Dead again. And she loves Dawn, but there's just something about that it's just it burned into people.
Yeah, and you know, and it created. It was like it was the perfect thing at the perfect time, and it created this fear because, you know, I think what my dad touched on so much was that it could be literally anybody. It could be, you know, your wife, your daughter, your best friend, your neighbor, your mailman, whoever. And 1 minute you're talking to them, and the next minute they're trying to tear you apart and eat you. And that, you know, especially back then in the times, man, that was some powerful stuff. You know, and then you've got, couple that with the fact that you've got all these kids that were our age back then finding it when they weren't allowed, and then that became like this sort of permanent scar that led to, you know, I think where we are at now, because all of us are now our age today and have spent our lives touched by this stuff. And so I think that all of that, you know, I mean, I've got friends who've raised their kids for 15 years to be zombie fans, you know, and have, you know, take their 2-year-old and dress them up like a zombie for Halloween. And, you know, it's crazy. It's unbelievable, but it's beautiful.
I was walking to the theater today, and I saw 2 5-year-olds, and they had on, one had a stormtrooper mask. I don't remember what the other one had on, and they were fighting imaginary zombies. They had their Nerf guns, and they were just, that's what they were doing. Like, that is how much it is in pop culture these days.
Yeah.
Is that at 4 years old, you're fighting imaginary zombies.
Yeah,
That's
you're
your
playing humans
boogeyman.
versus zombies. Yeah, it used to be like cowboys and Indians, and then it was like some other stuff when we were all little kids, and cops and robbers was a big one. And now it's humans versus zombies, and kids run around and they, fake bite each other and turn and do the whole thing. And hey, you're a zombie now,
It's incredible.
It really is. And to think that where it all came from, and to think about the fact that that was my dad and his partners. I mean, it's a lot to think about if I actively think about it.
Yes, no, it is. It's a lot. I mean, they changed culture and pop culture forever. Without Night of the Living Dead, like imagine entertainment and society move forward. Like, it would be completely different if I had a time machine and we stopped that movie. Like we'd live in a different world. All you would be gone. There'd be no horror fest.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, conventions, all of this stuff was born from that. I mean, so I've even heard people say that we wouldn't have Comic-Cons if it weren't for what those guys did. Not just my dad, but all of those guys back then.
Yeah, for real.
And it's interesting because you were talking about Carpenter and Tobe Hooper and everything, and I remember I remember sitting in my dad's apartment in downtown Pittsburgh, and he would be on the phone with those guys, and they would be having the same conversations that we have today as artists. Man, fuck, this is gonna suck. Like, why am I even doing this? This movie is just what, and. Or even when you get it done, man, are people going to like it? And if they don't like it, am I done? And these guys would have those conversations with each other, and it was crazy to listen to, because it was like I remember Carpenter would call him and like play music for him that he was writing.
No, that's incredible.
and my dad, and I would only hear my dad's side of it. People like, no, I'm telling you, it's good, man. It's good. Stop it. Put it in the movie, it's good. There'd be a pause, and he'd be like, I'm not going to tell you again. Stuff like that. Yeah. So it was cool. And John did a lot of the same stuff for my dad, too. So those were really cool memories.
Yeah, oh, great, and great movies. Before we wrap up here, does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I got a question.
Sure.
Character creation.
Sure.
Some of my favorite characters in all movies come from these types of movies. And so I'm wondering, when you're writing a character, do you have a very particular actor in mind who you're going to pair it with? Or do you just write the character and then seek out an actor who you hope is going to best portray it?
That's a really good question. I don't know how other people do it. All I can do is tell you that, when I do it, I don't, unless there's a very specific character that's inspired by an actor, I try not to think of any actor when I write anything. Because at the end of the day, I mean, it's all business nowadays. It's not like it used to be. Now you've got, sales agents telling you, well, yeah, we'd love it if you use that guy. He's great, but we can't sell him in France. So you have to have these conversations. And those conversations kill creativity. And so if I were to think about that stuff while I was writing, I would go insane, and I would probably never finish a script. So what I try to do is I try to write a character, and I try to put him in a scene. And then I actually try to let those characters lead me through the rest of the script. And I try to follow them in my mind. It doesn't make sense when I say it out loud, but I basically just try to I come up with these characters, put them in situations, and then follow them and try to write down what they do. Like, even though I'm writing it all. It's this weird disassociative thing. So no, I can't think of an actor when I write something.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, yes.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about practical versus special effects? I see, like, now in more modern day horror films, we're seeing special effects mostly 90% of the time.
Like CGI, you mean? Yeah.
Could you see that ever going back to practical again? Because it does have that sort of feel where you're like, oh, this is authentic. Versus special, where you can obviously be like third green screen, like what you're saying when they're underwater. You can see the third green screen. Can you talk a little bit about that and like how do you see it?
Yeah, sure. I'm practical effects all the way. I mean, like I said, I did a movie called Stunt and Hill, and we had a couple of effects in there that we had to supplement just because, like, at the end of the day, we scalped a girl and ripped out her intestines, and it was really fun. But you could see the seam, And so we had to go in digitally and kind of remove that. But that was just a little bit of like rotoscoping and things like that, you know. All the blood was practical. And again, my big stance on that is that, you know, there's a difference between an actor who feels a squib go off and an actor who's, you know, reacting to somebody going bang, you know. There's a difference. There's a difference between an actor being covered from head to toe with blood and an actor who sits in makeup while somebody carefully makes it look like they're covered with blood. You know, I'm the guy that runs up with a 5-gallon bucket of fake blood and throws it at my actor. You know, which I don't know if I should. I guess it's too late now. But yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to take a little bit of a break. We'll come back for a brief intro for Day of the Dead, but let's give a huge hand to George C. Romero. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us. We really appreciate it.
Not at all. Thank you for having me. This has been a phenomenal experience, and I'm looking forward to, you know, everything. So, thank you.